All right, time to look at some examples from the neoclassical style and see how that connects to what was going on during the Age of Enlightenment. All right, so here we are, neoclassicism and the Enlightenment, 1700 to 1800 still. Some of the questions to consider. How does the neoclassical style relate to the Rococo style that came before? What ideological associations did the neoclassical style carry in France and the new American quote-unquote democracy? Terms to know and use: the Enlightenment and neoclassicism, as well as the French Revolution of 1789. So, the Enlightenment. Reason becomes the primary source of authority and legitimacy, advocating ideals of liberty, progress, tolerance, and science. So instead of looking to the church, they're looking to reason for advocating those ideals. And that will refer as well to the abolishment of slavery and giving women certain types of rights very, very slowly. This is the first kind of like beginnings of some of that progress. Here's one example of a neoclassical painting by Angelica Kauffman called Cornelia Pointing to Her Children as Her Treasures from 1789. It's oil on canvas, as you can see, 40 inches by 50 inches. And basically what we're looking at is neoclassicism in all its glory. A counterpoint to the frivolity and extravagance of the Rococo style. Instead, you have references to classical Greece and Rome. So what are some of those references? Well, we can see several of them just in this very kind of like minimal composition. First of all, it's what they're wearing. So we see these women wearing kind of like classical Greco-Roman outfits, including, and their children, I should say, including sandals, and including what would become known as this kind of empire waist gown, these garments that are maybe associated with classical or ancient Greece and Rome. We also see references to Greco-Roman architecture. So ancient classical Greek and Roman architecture, like the columns in the background, and the use of marble. They appear to be made out of marble. So some of those references, even though we're looking at France in the 1780s, there are a lot of what seem to be very Greco-Roman elements. Really a stark contrast when we compare it to the frivolity of those Rococo examples we were just looking at, like The Swing by Fragonard. It's actually more of a moral story. Cornelia is saying, you know, I don't need treasures, I don't need jewelry, all I need are my children, they're my treasures. So it's promoting the sense of moral virtue. Another example is by Jacques-Louis David, Oath of the Herati, or Horatii, 1784 to 85. And what we see here is a classic example, again, of uplifting civic and moral duty over some sort of frivolous outdoor love escapade, like we saw in the Rococo era. It's a duty to your country above all other obligations, including love and family. So it's maintaining a duty to your country above all others. And that might be something that we can relate to today, even duty to country above all other obligations, including love and family. In this age of social distancing, you know, you have to think about the, you know, overall wellness of our society and of the world rather than your own personal desire, your own personal relationships. And it's not easy, but you do what is right. And that's kind of the message of neoclassical art as well. There are a lot of connections between neoclassicism and the Renaissance in terms of having this kind of like stable, balanced, often symmetrical composition. Both the neoclassical art and Renaissance art make references to the classical past in the architecture and the clothing being worn. So a lot of it is like references to the past, looking back. But it's also very much of its time. If we consider 1784 is when this painting was made. Just a few years later would come the French Revolution of 1789, in which the goals were the abolition of feudalism, of the absolute monarchy. In other words, no power in one sole person, but instead giving some of the power to everyone else, the other 99%. Separation between church and state, and of course, freedom of speech. The idea here was that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Now, I know probably a lot of us are looking at that statement and maybe rolling our eyes, or maybe saying like, yeah, okay, men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Or like in the back of our minds, certain men are born and remain free and equal in rights. So it's something that we understand is a little, contradictory in some terms. But it's exactly that kind of democratic goal, that kind of language of democracy, freedom, and equality that would be incorporated into the art and architecture of the new United States of America. It's something that influenced the painting, as well as statements that would be included in our newly drafted documents, like the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, something that we recognize is nice in theory, but was not put into practice. It still is not really put into practice to this day. So it's an ideal, it's a goal that is rooted in democracy, but we understand that it conflicts with the reality of things. And yet it's this kind of neoclassical language that evokes the very first democracy in ancient Greece. That neoclassical style, those references to classical Greek columns that would be incorporated into the White House, which tends to represent, well, this is the seat of our American government. How do we represent our ideals as a nation? What style is going to represent us? That's why they chose the neoclassical style. It was supposed to be emblematic of striving for everyone having equality and equal rights under the law. You can zoom in on some of those columns and see, yes, we have some very familiar looking architectural elements like those columns, like the pediment, which we see above the doorway, and like the portico, which is an ancient Roman architectural feature. So it's this kind of like open porch where you have columns supporting the pediment. So it's no coincidence that they're evoking the past. It's not only this connection to ideals of democracy, but also they're trying to make connections to that history, to that past. Again, this ideal that all men are created equal. Michelle Obama said in 2016 in her DNC speech, quote, "I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves, and I watch my daughters, two beautiful, intelligent Black young women, playing with their dogs on the White House lawn." And I remember when I first saw that speech, I was like really moved by her words and seeing the change that had come to this nation since this building was first constructed. So what is the architecture of our time and place going to say about us in future generations when people look back and analyze our architecture? Are they going to see this as an architecture of democracy or not? Finally, I'd like to, as we conclude our discussion of Rococo and Neoclassical, take a moment to look at these two images which we did not look at. One is Neoclassical and one is Rococo. But can you tell which one is which? And if so, how can you tell? What keywords might apply and why? Do any of those terms apply to these two paintings? And can you tell which is which? All right. So until next time, if you have any questions about the Rococo or the Neoclassical styles, please let me know. And feel free to post questions on the discussion board as well.